Hello and welcome to another weekly update. Three really interesting resources to point you at this week, and they're all pretty heavy devy. So I know sometimes it's the things I talk about are like a mixture of dev and IT pro or dev and even user. That's quite important though, because I think it's important for developers to understand the context in which they're doing things and not solely concentrate on just the development stuff. Understand the problems users are facing and the challenges that IT pros have. But it just so happens this week, all three things are fairly dev focused on the Office 365 and the Teams kind of platform space. All right, so first of all is some training opportunities for developers. So this is a new module. It's a Microsoft 365 training module, and it's in two parts. First of all is a load of training that's available, freely available to you, covering basic fundamental skills in Microsoft 365 development and sort of fundamental skills in how to extend Office, but then also some more advanced modules around building apps with Graph, around implementing Microsoft Identity, and around extending and customizing SharePoint, as well as extending Teams, specifically its own module on extending Teams and extending Office. So each one of those has a really nice structure. So there's labs, there's PowerPoints, there's slides, there's recordings, and there's knowledge tests all the way through. And if you've been through all of those, or if you go through all of those and you're super confident, there is an associated exam you can take. It's a brand new exam. It's currently in beta. It's called Microsoft 365 Certified Developer Associate certification. And the really great news is that because it's in beta right now, you have the opportunity to receive an 80% discount on the price. So this is not to be missed. If you have the opportunity and the time to go through these modules, I think they're going to be really good. It looks like they're rolling out at the moment, so don't feel you have to have all of the time to kind of jump on them straight away. They're rolling out over time, and they will be fully available by June 2020. So you've got plenty of time to consume them. You can start now and consume them at your own pace, and you know probably they'll just keep rolling out between now and June, and you'll always be bang up to date with the things that are coming out. If you're already pretty confident about some of this stuff, you can jump right in now and take the exam whilst it's in beta to take advantage of that amazing discount. So there's a blog post as well, which I'll link to on Microsoft Learn, that goes into lots of detail about this. But this is not to be missed if you want to add that certification. It's a really nice thing to have, on your CV, have on LinkedIn. Nice tool to have in your tool belt, and it gives you a bit of a range of exposure. If you've only ever done Teams development, for instance, it gives you a bit of exposure across the rest of Office as well, around extending and customizing SharePoint, for instance. So that's one thing that you can do if you have a bit of free time. Maybe Christmas is a good time. Work kind of tends to slacken off a bit over Christmas, and maybe if you're looking around for things to do and projects to do, if you don't find any of those, maybe do some certifications. Why not? All right, so second thing to tell you about is some API changes, and it's not Teams specifically, it's actually SharePoint, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway, because more and more what I'm seeing is that we don't have Teams developers anymore. We're having more Office 365 developers, Graph developers, and these developers are really working on multiple platforms. So it's not just Teams; it's also SharePoint. It's also some of the other, Yammer. It's the other Office suite products as well. So I wanted to make you available to this because it's an important announcement, because it's an API call that's being deprecated, and it's kind of as of now. And there's a specific API, and it's the old style API, SharePoint APIs, where it's the site collection name /site and then /API, and specifically it's the social.following /my/followed count, the one that you can use to get your follow account. As of now, it is no longer returning results. I'm not entirely sure whether it will error or whether it will just return nothing, and I haven't had a chance to check, I'm afraid. So just bear in mind, if you're not seeing problems, it doesn't mean that you're not just getting bad data. You may just be getting bad data. So if you're using that call, you should change. The change is that all of these SharePoint APIs are moving into Graph, and they're going to be superseded by the Graph APIs. So there is a followed sites API in Graph already. It's currently in beta, but you could go and find it in the beta docs. Again, I'll put a link to the beta docs for this particular Graph call as well in the show notes, so you can go and find that, and it gives you something clear to do as a kind of call to action. But this was only announced in the last 3 days, so it's probably fairly new. So just a heads up on that. If you're using that specific API call, then just be aware it's already gone away, and you should cut over to using Graph. All right, finally, last thing to tell you about. I noticed this, and it's a really good write-up of how to do authentication in your Teams bot, and it's in the Microsoft documentation, but it's quite new. And this happens sometimes, and I try and keep on top of it, but it happens sometimes that really great documentation goes into the Microsoft Docs, and they do that as a result of feedback from partners and from users and other developers who say, it's kind of hard to do this thing, there's no good documentation about it. And Microsoft will listen to that, and they have dedicated people whose job it is to write good documentation. And they don't always make a big song and dance about it when it happens. So this is one of those. It's a really good page in Microsoft Docs now for adding authentication to your Teams bot. So I wanted to kind of call it out and put a link to it so you know it exists. It's good because it goes through the whole kind of process about how auth works with the bot, how exactly you should do it, and then a real walkthrough of how to do it in Azure. So right at the start, from creating the resource group, creating a bot channel registration, creating an identity provider, and it walks you through in a kind of how-to with screenshots way to set the whole thing up with some sample code as well, steps to deploy, steps to test exactly what you should be seeing, to create a bot that gives you that nice sign-in experience, that button to click, and then the bot delegated sign-on is signed in and can take actions on your behalf, and can then access the data you're signed in as the user you're signed in as, and make permissions and take permissions on your behalf. So it's a really useful page. I'm going to be pointing people at this page because this comes up a lot. Authentication within a bot, delegated sign-on. The reason you do all this is because it enables the bot then to look up information from Graph on your behalf. So your calendar, your emails, the bot can then perform actions on your behalf, sending emails, moving things around in SharePoint, adding things to Teams, so many things, right? So it's a really common request to have bots perform Graph actions, and so I get that question a lot about authentication. So really good to see, really useful documentation, and it ends actually with a whole set of links for further reading as well, that dive into a bit more detail, and a load of code as well about what the manifest should look like, and some other code samples as well for additional things you could add. So really good to see. All right, so 3 kind of really good resources this week, which is good to see, and I think that's all I'm going to leave you with. So have a really good weekend, and I will talk to you again next week.